Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us to this session. Today I like to start with a statement for this session, and that is, since we're talking about futures here, that is that we cannot think about the future with a blind spot for one of the greatest organisms or living communities on Earth, which is fungi. And maybe some of you know that fungi have transformed the earth once, right? Converting rocks into rich soil, which actually made life on land possible. So in this way, they have paved the way for our common evolution. However, and despite this fact, they are today still a forgotten kingdom. That is at least in modern societies, right? So, for example, maybe you've heard that scientists estimate there are something around 3 to 6 million of species of fungi out there, and yet we only know 6% of that. So that's already telling you about our blind spot for fungi. However, this is changing, and there's hope in that. I like to think about that as kind of fungi releasing their spores everywhere and in a way seeding human imagination for innovation. And for example, we have seen this growing movement that is advocating for the recognition of fungi as a kingdom, equally like flora and fauna. And just as a bit of an anecdote, this year in April's issue, National Geographic, the magazine, they had fungi on their cover story for the first time in 130 years of history of National Geographic, which, again, it's nice that fungi are becoming kind of a star out there and more popular. And probably you're familiar with that, especially if you are in the biotech or design community, because we have been seeing this growing number of fungal innovations. Everything from a fungal leather to mycelium-based materials, all the way to fungal architectures. And that's wonderful. But while this is happening, there's still, again, a blind spot for fungi when it comes to biodiversity assessments and conservation. So maybe that's also telling us about a dominant ways of relating to nature, where we are still better at figuring out what we can take from nature rather than what we can give back. And as designers, perhaps that's also kind of the default mindset, right? That we, again, are better at isolating a species in a lab rather than understanding more about their ecological role. But that's also changing, and the ethics of how we relate to fungi is changing. And actually, fungi are teaching us about interdependencies and symbiotic alliances. And maybe, again, some of you have heard about these plant-fungi collaborations in nature. And actually, plants made it out of water because of their collaboration with fungi, all these 500 million years ago. And even today, around 90% of plants depend on mycorrhizal networks for their survival. And maybe some of you know about the mycorrhizal networks. These are formed with mycelium and the root systems of plants. And they create, this is like the popular name that it got, the World Wide Web or the Internet of the Forest, right? So this was also popular. And in these networks that exchange, fungi produce nutrients for the plants, like nitrogen or phosphorus, and then plants give sugars to fungi. So when we really look at this kingdom, there's so many things that we can learn, and this is why we're here today, to reflect about what kind of futures we can weave together with fungi. And I'll say to that, and this is the last thing I'll say before going into the panel, that if we are able to see fungi as a companion species, we can also learn about their ways of existing. And in that sense, we can take this metaphor that fungi are the nature's alchemists in a way, right? They're all about decomposition and transformation. And perhaps that's what we need in our current crisis, in a massive ecological crisis, not just to create these fungi-human alliances to literally restore degraded landscapes, but also to decompose old imaginaries of how we develop further. So I'm really happy and honored to be orchestrating this panel and learning about the journey with fungi of Dima, Claudia, and Thomas. But I'll leave it to them to do a quick introduction of their work and who they are before we jump into the reflection questions of this panel. So maybe, Dima, you can start.
Thank you so much, Melissa. It's an honor to be here at the Dubai Future Foundation and to present the future of fungi, or fungi, whichever way you want to pronounce it. I personally prefer fungi. My name is Dima Srouri. I'm founder of two companies, Mychosphere, which works with fungi and mycelium products, and Biospheric City Lab. Biospheric City Lab is a platform and a boutique consultancy for sustainable development, and we focus on the built environment. The two companies work together in such a way where we leverage our design capabilities at Biospheric City Lab and our built environment knowledge to advance the work with fungi and mycelium. So they both support each other, where we initiate projects that showcase the way we can use mycelium in our built environment. I'm essentially an urban planner, which is why I created Biospheric City Lab, but I'm also a citizen scientist that turned into an entrepreneur into mycelium work and fungi work. So this is, in a nutshell, who I am.
Hello, hi. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, I'm Claudia Colmo. I'm an architect, so I have a lot in common with Dima. I have a background in architecture. However, now I'm doing a PhD in a department at the Royal Danish Academy in Copenhagen called Chair for Biohybrid Architecture. Of course, my focus is on fungi, and I say fungi. So I am in the department of the Chair of Biohybrid for Biohybrid Architecture, and our aim in general is to combine concept of architecture and concept of biology. So basically we're trying to combine living organism with architecture to create an architecture that is more resilient in general. So we're trying to detach a bit from the traditional architecture that you see around in all over the world, and trying to find new ecological, I wouldn't say sustainable. I think we should, my work is framed in an ecological framework, solutions that are more ecological positive in this environmental crisis that we're living in. Yes.
Hello, I'm Thomas Jonas, and we say fungi in the US just because I think fungi is for Romans, and they're pretty much all dead. So the I for the English speakers, it turns out into the I, and they both right. So I think you both have a correct pronunciation. I'm actually French. Some of us have to be. I apologize about that. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Nature's Fine. Nature's Fine is a company based in Chicago in the United States, and we make food out of fungi, and we will have some to share just outside at the end of this panel. So we will feed you fungi. Don't get scared. So the company started from NASA research on extreme forms of life, and the goal of the research was really to figure out if NASA was going to send a probe to a moon of Saturn, how should we look for life? Which took us to a ecosystem which is a little bit different than the one we evolved here, which is the volcanic springs, the acidic volcanic springs of Yellowstone. And we discovered a bunch of new-to-the-world microorganisms, including one, a fungi, which is about 60% protein, and it's a very high-quality protein. It has all the essential amino acids. We developed a technology to grow the microorganism in a way that enables us to get this high-quality protein using 99% less water, 99% less land, and emitting a fraction of the greenhouse gas that you would get out of a cow or even a chicken. And we are currently commercial. So this is not just a project. We are commercial. We are for sales in about 1,000 stores in the US. We do dairy alternative product. We do meat alternative product. We actually also just launched a material out of the same base technology that was premiered a few weeks ago on the fashion runway of Paris. So that's what we do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing these initial reflections, and I'm going to make sure that we go deeper in those. So that said, I wanted to start this round of discussion having one question for all of you. And first, I think, again, I want to make another statement, and this is that fungi are intelligent species. And that's been shown by research lately when we are seeing these traits of short-term memory, learning, problem-solving skills, decision-making characteristics in fungi. And of course, the fact that this sounds strange has to do more with the fact that we have a super narrow view of intelligence in general towards nature, right? So in this way, fungi are also challenging us to expand this notion. So that said, I think if we see nature as a teacher, then the question is obvious here: what have we learned? Have you learned from fungi, right? What fungi has taught you? And I like for you to share maybe a bit of the story of the species that has, captivated your curiosity in your work, maybe more than one species. So yeah, maybe Dima, you want to start?
Yes, when I started researching fungi, there were two mind-blowing stories that made me absolutely fall in love with this organism. We've all heard about Hiroshima and the destruction that happened and the radiation impacts on the biodiversity, on the land. And basically, the amount of radiation that was dropped there just caused every single plant and wildlife to completely disappear. And the scientists noticed that after years of this happening, the first thing that started to grow was actually fungi. And it was a certain type of fungi that was growing towards the radiation. And that was a mind-blowing story for me, because I thought, what could we learn about this organism that can help us regenerate land? And the same thing actually happened in so many places like Chernobyl. And the particular species that we talk about specifically in Japan is Matsutake. And there is a whole book that was written about Matsutake mushroom as an organism that actually helped regenerate the land and develop livelihood of the people who were trading it from Japan to the US. So that was something that totally got me into this organism, which is misunderstood and underestimated in one of the organisms that we have. The second story was a story that relates to me as an urban planner, which I would tell over and over again. And it's about a certain type of fungi, which was labeled as fungi in the beginning, and then later scientists discovered that it's just a mold. It's called the slime mold, and it's a brainless unicellular organism that actually develops a network so efficiently that scientists could map the Tokyo subway network, railway network, on the same network that this fungi develops to reach food, which is mind-blowing in the sense that we as urban planners and transport planners always try to find the shortest and the best route to connect different parts of our cities. And we have created indices to measure that. So we have something called the walkability index, the connectivity index, and we always try to make our cities a lot more efficient. And this unicellular organism has managed to create something that is even more efficient than the Tokyo network. So what can we learn about this as urban planners for the future of our cities is something that really got me into fungi.
Thank you, Dima. Do you want to continue?
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, for me, I remember I fell in love with fungi, I think, about 6 years ago. And before that, I mean, I kind of knew what it was, but I hadn't have like a really clear idea. And I remember it was my master program, and I was thinking, I just want to do something different, you know? I just want to do something that, you know, doesn't involve concrete or whatever technology that we already have. And how can I make a little contribution in our society that is ecological positive? So I was looking at some YouTube videos, stuff like that, and then I encountered mycelium, and I was like, wow, this is actually amazing. And then I started digging in, and there was people doing leathers, doing other products, and you know, it started kind of to grow in me. But I think the moment when I really realized the potential of this organism is when I read Mycelium Running by Paul Stamets, which is one of the guru of mycology. And I remember I was reading these old chapters about ecological restoration, reforestation, and all you need is like a very easy technology which involves dead wood and living mycelium. And I was asking myself, but why don't I see this more often? Why don't I see it like in farms, in gardens, or in the city? It's such an easy technology. You don't need robots. You don't need like high tech, which, I mean, I am so grateful we do have, but, you know, to involve communities and people, you need to kind of decentralize this kind of high tech and really give easy solution so that each of us can make a contribution that it's ecological positive. So I was like, oh, this is amazing. And I was an architect, I mean, kind of to try to be an architect back then. And then, of course, I was thinking, why can I not merge this concept of micro-remediation and architecture itself, you know? And after that, I had one of the most amazing years in my career, which was my master, my last year of master, and it just, I came up with this concept of remediating architecture. So basically combine living mycelium and architectural configuration. In this case, back in the days, I was 3D printing soil as framework for embedding living mycelium. So, I mean, that was kind of the start of my journey, which I'm so grateful I did. Yeah.
So who is breathing in this room right now? If you're breathing, please raise your hand. And if your neighbor is not breathing, let's call the emergency service right away. But here's the thing. Every breath you're taking, you're actually breathing in some fungal spores. And you've been doing that since the first breath you ever taken in your life. So my point is, fungi are part of our life, much more intimately than we actually understand. Now, what we do at Nature's Find is we make food out of that. And in particularly we make protein. Now, I'm gonna break a big secret to you. You, me, the cow, the chicken, we do not make new protein. A cow doesn't make protein. That sounds a little crazy, but a cow doesn't make protein. A cow is basically the equivalent of a protein battery. So think about it this way. The cow basically eats a lot of grass or a lot of corn or whatever you feed the cow, extract the protein out of it, and the protein gets concentrated in its body. And then we eat the body of the cow, and that's how we get our protein. So if you think about energy, it would be like the cow is a protein battery, but what about the protein generation? You know, in energy, people are focused on the energy generation. And here are the things. In this planet, there are only two types of creature that can create net new protein. And those are the plants and the microorganisms. Among them, the fungi are really excellent at it. Now, if you think about food, for probably the last 11,000 years, we've basically been doing a version of the same thing. Slightly improving, right? We're getting better, but the wheat, the rice, the base of our food is coming from things we domesticated 11,000 years ago. So it's really an ancient technology. Think about the iPhone you might have in your pocket, and think about the iPhone that is from 11,000 years ago. There is no iPhone 11,000 years ago, but there is a version of a beef that could be in a hamburger today from 11,000 years ago. The technology has not changed as much in food. Now, we are at a very unique moment where we have biotechnology tools that enable us to use this much more efficient way of making protein, that is the microbial way, particularly the fungi way. Now, you were mentioning earlier that fungi is this sort of third branch of life that's not a plant, not an animal. It's actually closer to us animal than it is to plant. So next time you work by a produce aisle when you go shopping, keep in mind that the mushroom next to the carrot is, the mushroom is your cousin. It's closer to you than it is to the carrot. So just wave at your cousin next time you get there. I think the point is here, we can actually grow our protein using these microbial sources and fungi in particular in a way that is incredibly more efficient. And in places like where we are right now, where getting the resources aligned to grow this food is not a given, and knowing that climate change is happening, and knowing that the population is going to continue to grow, I think it's really exciting to think about how this new technology and fungi in particular can help us achieve these goals.
Thank you so much, Thomas. And now you already went ahead to go deeper in your work, and now I'm going to pick on you a bit more in the next round. But yeah, this next round, I would like to explore what has been your journey, specifically in your projects, right? So I again turn to you, Dima, because again, we're hearing so many ways, endless ways in which fungi could help us address some of the most pressing issues of our times. And you see, like, already this diversity that we have in the panel talks about that, right? So, Dima, we have heard that fungi could help us to create circular economies. And I would like to ask you about this superpower of fungi, this metabolic power to decompose waste, and how that connects to urban planning as well. And if you can maybe share with us some of those insights from the works that you've done, and also in the region especially.
Yes, so fungi plays a huge role in our forest systems. They decompose organic matters. So all the fallen leaves, all the fallen logs from the trees are decomposed and broken down into smaller bits by fungi to be availed as food for other organisms as well. And without fungi, our forests would be covered with a huge layer and a huge amount of leaves and dry matter and fallen logs, and we would just suffocate. So if we think about it for our cities, we think about our waste management strategies. Like, how do we manage our waste in our cities when we have this huge lesson to learn from nature? Nature is circular, fungi is circular by nature, and there is a huge lesson for us to learn from the way that fungi decomposes this material. The material that fungi decomposes is called lignocellulose biomass. In simpler terms, it's fiber or any agricultural waste. And in our cities, we find a lot of this laying around, which eventually goes to landfills. And it's underutilized most of the time. This has inspired a lot of people to start actually inoculating this material with fungi to grow something called mycelium material. And mycelium material is basically material that is grown with the root of fungi, which we call mycelium, which is composed of strands and a network from hyphae. This mycelium creates a bond that is like the binder in chemicals that glues the material together. So it's a natural glue, it's a natural binder where you don't actually need to use any chemical binders. And it's a huge lesson for our industries as well in cities, because we keep using a lot of synthetic and chemical binders, which are harmful for humans, for our biodiversity, and we're unable to recycle them. To mention one of them, which is a huge a hugely dangerous chemical that is used to bind a lot of material together is formaldehyde, which is a carcinogen, a very well-known carcinogen, and we actually use it every day in our houses, in our offices, and we breathe this all the time. So can we find a way to bind material using nature was the question that actually drew a lot of people to use mycelium material. In Europe, they use sawdust from the wood industry, they use hemp, they use a lot of agricultural waste to grow mycelium. In the UAE, it was a completely different story because we don't have forests, we have different trees, and our trees are actually endangered, like the gaff tree, so we cannot actually use it. So the only thing that we thought of using was what's available in abundance, which is the palm tree. So we're actually upcycling palm waste to grow our mycelium material, and it's the first company in the UAE to ever do this for mycelium material. And by doing this, we're upcycling this material into useful material that we can use into construction, and it has different shapes, different forms, different textures, varieties of surface areas which we can use in construction and in the industry that we have. Now, the first project that we started with was actually the only project that we thought would work in the UAE because mycelium was only adopted by the art industry in the UAE. Nobody else was interested in mycelium except for the art industry. So what we started working with was actually art installations, which we used in festivals like Al-Quds Art Fest in Dubai. And then we've actually installed the first mycelium art installation as a piece of public art in Abu Dhabi on Al Maria Island. That was 2 years ago, and the demand for mycelium was still a bit low. But then slowly we started actually taking it into the design and the construction industry when people started understanding the full story behind mycelium. So the second project that we worked on was a project that we could actually build part of the properties with mycelium into the theme of the project. This project was a pavilion that was built for COP28 last year, and it was sponsored by Art Jamil. It's called Tarabot, and the idea behind the project is to create a pavilion that provides an interspecies habitat where different types of organisms, birds, insects can actually start being attracted to this pavilion to start feeding on it. So the mycelium material was only one part of a lot of bio-based material that was used for this shelter, including the particle board that was made from palm waste by Desert Board, a material that was made by datecrete using date seeds, and our mycelium material, which is also made using the sawdust of palm waste as well. So we succeeded in showcasing that mycelium can actually contribute to a great concept by providing this habitat. And when we first installed the mycelium material, it was intact. Month later, you come by and you see that the birds and insects started to feed on it. So it actually created food for the species that were attracted to this pavilion. And by doing this, we showcased that all of our pavilion and temporary structures that we build can actually go back to nature and be used to regenerate nature and provide habitat for nature instead of being wasteful by using material and then wasting it by taking it back to landfill. So it was a great concept that allowed the mycelium to contribute heavily to this concept. The third project that we have is something where we pushed the boundaries even further. So we started looking at the properties of mycelium as a great thermal insulation material, as a great acoustic insulation material, and as a great material that can help with the remediation of land. And we use this for a concept for an emergency shelter for displaced populations. This project was done by 4 designers. It's a collaboration between 4 designers. and it won the Abwab competition for Dubai Design Week this year, and it was featured on a lot of international magazines. What we managed to create here was a shelter that is made from bio-based material that provides protection from heat, from cold, provides privacy and safety for displaced populations, and it's a temporary installation where those displaced communities have to endure living in certain conditions for a while, and after they finish living in it, at the end of its life cycle, it can go back to Mother Nature to further regenerate soil. So this project was built around a full life cycle, building on the properties of mycelium to provide an emergency shelter that is temporary but mid-term solution for displaced populations.
Thank you so much, Dima, for the wonderful stories of circularity and beyond that, interspecies habitats. I'd like to turn now to you, Claudia, because we're also seeing a shift of paradigm in design where we're now learning to design keeping the fungi alive as opposed to deactivate it or put it also in simple words to kill it, right? And that it's also untapping new architectural functionalities. So I'd like for you to share with us what is the journey that you had exploring these novel functionalities, especially when it comes to bioremediation or microremediation with soil and water. And also to tell us what changes in design when you have to keep the fungi alive. What kind of new concerns do we have about being embedded in ecologies or sensing the needs of fungi in the living architectures or other topics that come to mind?
Yeah, thank you so much. And actually, I would like to pick up from Dima. I mean, your practice is very much mycelium-based composite practice, which relies on killing the organism to make panels and architectural configuration and so on. In my case, I come from that practice very much. As I said, I have introduced before the term of mycoremediation, which is basically the potential of mycelium to decontaminate soil from pollutants, and that means that you have to keep the organism living. Therefore, this opens up a lot of opportunities in architecture, I believe, but of course, then you have to think about that the architecture is not dead or inert, but it's actually living and it's its own cycle, and how do you deal with that? Because so far, we're being used to this kind of traditional architecture where it's one outcome and prefabricated and so on. So how do you deal with a whole different practice that involves actually a living organism? So in my case, as I have introduced already, I am very focused on mycoremediation, which is the base of my practice, but also the one in my chair in Copenhagen. So I've started by, in my master program, started by investigating soil remediation as the first step. So I've been, I don't know if we can, yeah. So I've been kind of constructing these structures made by 3D printed soil that were embedding living mycelium. Of course, there is the first period of time where the pollution in the soil is very high, so we talk about hydrocarbons, for example. And then I kind of imagine that there would be this ecological succession which the architecture initiates, and therefore the blooming of other organisms and so on. The beauty of mycoremediation is the fact that if you know what kind of contaminants you have in the soil, for example, then you can choose the right mycelium species that actually are compatible to have effectiveness in the remediation of these contaminants. So in this case, there was a lot of hydrocarbons, pyrene, fluorine, oil, so on and so on. So the best, from Paul Stamets still, the best species are found to be the oyster mushroom and the turkey tails. So there is this kind of collaboration between mushroom towards this remediation. And then I think there is another image. Yeah, so this is actually my prototype, which was super successful. As you can see, there are the pinnings and so on. And this is actually the core of the practice that I'm in, so this biohybrid. Like how do you actually integrate concept of architecture? So, technologies, for example, in this case, I use 3D printing, but also living organisms. So there is this completely decentralization of human, in my case. I mean, that's what I think. And it's not anymore about, what does the human need? It's like, what does the fungi need? What kind of environment does it need? And it doesn't mean that in my practice, we don't think about humans anymore, but it's kind of something that is consequential. Because if you start thinking about Earth first, and trying to, be ecologically positive, what your practice, then it kind of benefits us too. So it kind of, this design rules or, concept and how you conceptualize architecture is kind of reversed. And so now I'm in my halfway through my PhD, and I'm focusing on actually water remediation. So I'm trying to figure out protocols and fabrication of living mycelium filters for water remediation of pyrene, so it's an hydrocarbon still. So this is actually my liquid cultures. I work with three different mushrooms, mycelium, Schizophila commune, Pleurotus, and Ganoderma. And then I produce these filters. Next slide. They're not so excited as the picture that I showed before, but I'm in a really kind of systematic experimental plan to understand if these filters are able to biofilter, biosorb, and bioremediate. So kind of it's a new concept, I guess, and I'm really curious to see if it would work. So far, it's a good potential. But I just want to say very briefly about the practice. So I'm coming from like an architectural practice that, in my bachelor's and so on, it was very focused on this kind of modernism imprint. So the space has to be sterile and super clean and oh my God, nature, less is more. You see Miss van der Rohe kind of architectural, housing. It's like you're in a zoo, but you are the animal, and the people are looking. So it's kind of completely reverse. I think right now we're into this bio-revolution phase where we are really, at least what I see from architects, we're really trying to make an impact through the use of nature, because nature has all the answers. We just have to use it in a way that is respectful and functional at the same time. So think about that. You're not gonna extract anymore your materials, but you can grow it. It can self-regenerate, self-heal. I mean, there is so much potential, and we're just at the beginning. So this is pretty much amazing.
Yes, and that's really interesting also how working with nature, in this case with fungi, is actually retraining us. We often think that we are the authors of design, right? And actually designing with nature is also breaking or disrupting this notion of authorship. And trying to learn about the behavior and the needs and the well-being of the species that we work with. So as you say, like the second example, it doesn't go yet to maybe the architectural phase, but there's so much to learn in the process of experimenting with the behavior and what food does it like and how, all the conditions around that. So that's really speaks a lot about the process. So now I turn to you, Thomas, and when we were having the first reflections here with the panel, you mentioned something that stayed with me, and that is that as a Chicago-based company, that you're working producing fungal protein in an area that used to be a site for meat processing, and that already was really interesting to me because it speaks about transformation, and in that sense, maybe I would like to ask you about your journey. How did you go from this scientific discovery that you told us about in Yellowstone all the way to mainstreaming products and diversifying even now into what now that you share with us about the letter? So how was this process for you?
Randomly. But I think at the deepest level, it's what nature is doing. I think what you heard from the three of us is fundamentally the same thing. We are basically taking a page from nature's own playbook. And nature's own playbook, through a few gazillion years, has optimized an incredible amount of things. And we're just discovering these things. They have been around forever, but through a random process, they've been optimized. I mean, we can discuss whether it's random or, I mean, those are deeper discussion. But I think fundamentally, what you just said about, nature as the answer, it's so true. We like to think, and nature's fine, that nature has the answer, and the language to ask the question and try to understand the answer is science. That is really fundamentally what science is. Science is how you ask the question and how do you interpret the answer. So fungal organisms are the master of transformation, and they are really the master at redistributing resources. If you think about it, a lot of the microorganisms that we're talking about are like micro pipelines. And what flows through them is very often carbon. So it's not very different than the pipeline that you might find in the region, and it's another carbon type of, that would flow through. But the similarities are mind-blowing if you think about it, right? So the fungal organisms really reallocate not just carbon, but a lot of carbon across the players, across the creatures that are living there. And that's why they are so great at remediation, because they are redistributing things that might be contaminant to make them available for life form. So for us, and Nature's Fine, it is kind of fun that to find ourselves right there in the middle of what used to be the center of the meat industry in the US. But what's even more interesting is the street in which we are in Chicago, which is called Pershing Road, used to be up to about 100 years ago, it used to be an open-air canal. And in that open-air canal, the stockyard, which was one of the greatest, one of the biggest slaughterhouse in the world, was basically dumping the blood, all the leftover of the meat industry. You can imagine what it is. That was flowing into the Chicago River, which was then flowing into the lake, thereby poisoning the water supply of the city of Chicago. And at the time, people turned into a very, I would call it Soviet-like solution. They decided, well, how to make sure that it's not going to get into the lake? Let's just reverse the river. And they flowed the river to Indianapolis and just don't drink the water there. But so those were the solution. I think the important thing here is that solution to get your protein before was just devastating for the entire environment. And today, in Chicago, we're able to make this using, as I mentioned earlier, a fraction of the resources. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of what this looks like, this is in Yellowstone. And this is a picture of one of the lake in Yellowstone. And every layer of color that you see is actually get this color because of a different microbial and not just fungal, but microbial ecosystem. So here, just within a few a few feet, you have worlds. And what you find in Yellowstone is because it's a volcanic volcanic place, you have gradients and changes that happen at a speed that are absolutely hard to understand, to the point that from here to there, you could have literally different worlds, different microbial world, and it's absolutely fascinating. So I think we have a few other slides. So this is, to give you a little more, this is a little movie that I showed with my iPhone, so it's not great definition, but this is where we found the organism. This is just above the lava chamber. And this water that you see have a level of acidity equivalent to a car battery.
Very broad.
So you're really in an environment where everything that falls in it,
very hydrated. It's amorphous.
everything that falls in it dies. And actually, as a matter of fact, a guy fell in it a few years ago. The only thing that was found left was his plastic wallet.
Oh, God.
But life finds a way. And so our fungal organisms evolved here and developed abilities to survive in an environment that anywhere else would be considered a super fun, ultra dirty environment, because it's naturally dirty because of this extreme volcanic condition. And here again, we're just taking a page from Nature's Playbook because it's an acidophile. I think we have a few more visuals. So those are some of the products. Those are the products we have at Nature's Fine. We're able to use our microorganisms to do dairy as well as meat alternative. And I know you're gonna say, wait a minute, you're using the same organisms to do dairy and meat. How can you do that? And my answer to that is, how do you think the cow is doing it? That's what a cow does. And as a matter of fact, now we're doing leather, so we're continuing. I'd like to say we are a cow now. We are a cow. And we are able to do a wide range of type of foods, and those are actually, all of these are products that we've made, and that go from the chocolate mousse on the right to burgers. And I want to emphasize the point that you're probably thinking fungal food, yeah, I don't know if I'm ready for that. I don't know if I want to taste that. But I just want you to challenge yourself a little bit on that. And my point here is, first of all, the protein that you're getting in one, whether it's a microbial or whether it's an animal, whether it's coming from one single cell organism or from one multi-cell organism, there's no difference. It's the same, nutritionally, it's the same protein. So for your liver, for your intestine, it's the same thing. And as far as you think, and you're going to say, yeah, but what about taste? And I want to put, that's where I'm pulling my French passport out. So in France, we have a few things we're very proud of. And those are wine, bread, and cheese. And I want to make the point that without microbes, you're not going to have any of these. So actually, microbes are very, very good at making some of the things that we really like. And that's true as well for mushroom. Truffles, anybody? So there is no connection between this is going to taste good or this is coming. Let me just say it in a more direct way. It's not because it's coming from the cadaver of a dead animal that it's going to taste good. And by the way, I'm not vegan. Right? You don't have to be vegan to think that things can come and taste good from very different places.
Thank you so much, Thomas. We have little time. We still have one more question for the panel. So I still want to make this question, but maybe just ask you to kind of like just 1 minute to come up with an answer to this. So we have time for a couple of questions from the audience. And that is, we have learned so far that we breathe fungi, we can eat fungi, we can live in living architectures, fungal architectures. So my question is, how do you envision fungi-human collaborations in the future? And what kind of changes, perhaps in policies, mindsets, technologies, or scientific breakthroughs would you envision that are needed for this to become more mainstream in our society? So maybe you go first.
Let me try and answer this in 1 minute. I think I'm going to build on what Thomas said, is that nature existed for a long time. They've already adapted so much, and they've solved all the problems that we're dealing with today. So by learning from nature, I think this is the way forward. But in the past years, scientists tend to be more of reductionist, like looking at one particular issue or element or organism in isolation. And what we need to think for the future is an ecosystem way towards nature, towards our cities, how we plan, how we design, by looking at the relationships between the elements that we have in the built environment, in nature, and the interaction with humans, animals, how it affects our biodiversity, which is something that is really lacking. And specifically, I'm talking about urban planning. Everything is working in isolation, and I'm pushing towards an ecosystem way of thinking in our cities where we consider nature a huge and a key player in what we do, and at the same time we learn from nature this ecosystem way of survival, adaptation, and resilience which we need for our cities.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, so I totally agree. And yeah, I think it's about this relational thinking and this human supremacy that we have to start to rethink, and more about what it's not about things, it's about connections. And actually it goes back to the panel before us that was really interesting. But yeah, so in my case, from an architecture point of view, and in the department that I'm working for, I think we kind of lay down a mission and a vision. So we want to use design as a tool to make architecture an ecological asset and not an ecological burden. I think this is very important, and then using two type of technologies, which are weaving. That is something that I'm not specialized, but my colleagues are. So it's a traditional craft. And yesterday in the museum, you know, it was amazing to see that it is present in even here in Dubai. I mean, weaving with hair of camels and you know, and so on. So using local crafts and fermentation. So, and even fermentation has a really long history. So why cannot as people that actually should be in touch with our tradition, why can we not use those traditions and kind of transform them in a way that can be used in our modern age? So yeah, and that it is by involving communities and societies and so on. So as I said, I'm an architect, but again, I think architecture now should be part of a communal kind of effort and not just one single element or one single person or office. So yeah.
So your question was about how we can accelerate. How can we accelerate something? In what pertains to food, I think there is two areas that I would like to point to. The first one is regulatory. So those are new foods. So and regulatory is always. A U.S. senator explained to me that regulatory have two purposes. It's to, one, protect the consumer, and two, protect existing supplier of whatever it is that's currently being used. And I think that's always true. It's interesting to think about food and fungi because we evolved as a species for a much longer amount of time as a hunter-gatherer than farmers and growers. So in reality, you know, just think about the sort of energy math. It's much easier to pick up a mushroom than to go and catch a rabbit. So we know that for the overwhelming part of our evolution, we were actually consuming a lot of fungi material. And as a matter of fact, we know that, for instance, phi, which is the member of protein, is more digestible than meat. There's a protein digestibility index, and it's one of the highest that you can get to. The reason is because we evolved to eat these things. Now we kind of lost track of that when we became farmers, but it's interesting to keep that in mind. So regulatory is important. The second thing that's, of course, very important is building assets, fermentation capabilities. Farming has been around for 10,000 years, industrial fermentation for a few decades at best. So there is virtually no infrastructure. And one of the challenges is today every increment of additional capacity has to be built. So whoever is going to be building it first is going to win that game, but it's going to take some time to just build that. But as far as how I see the future happening, again, getting back to some of the things that we discussed earlier, it is fundamentally an efficiency play. What is really exciting about fungi organisms is their intrinsic efficiency and their ability to do a lot of things. And that's why, in a world where resources are going to be scarce, where there's going to be more and more of us to share the resources, getting more reliance from organisms that are really good at helping share the resources and help use them efficiently makes a lot of sense. So I'm very bullish on fungi.
Thank you, Thomas. Quick questions from the audience. Okay, there's one there, and then one there, and maybe if we have. So maybe we can do it all together and then see who wants to answer. So do you want to start? Maybe can you pass the microphone?
Thank you so much for speaking today. It's I say actually fungi. I don't say fungi, and I'm glad to hear that someone actually says it the same way as I do. So you were earlier mentioning how fungi are like around us and beneficial in many ways, like architecture, for example, or even medication, or like food, for example, as well, like mushrooms. And but what about different kind of fungi? There is this guy called cordyceps, and it's considered as a parasite. And like a lot of people probably know about it from Last of Us, like the game or show. The question is, do you think there could come a time in the future where fungi would use us instead of like us using like the fungi itself?
We take the other question and then, well, the panel thinks about this first one. Okay.
Thank you so much to the panel. I really appreciated it. I wondered if you had any thoughts on using fungi in perhaps a slightly different way to communicate, sense, and detect in the way that they certainly do in temperate areas of the world. I have no idea how fungi work in the forests in the arid areas, but certainly those aspects of sensing and communicating are so important in the more temperate lands. And any thoughts on that would be interesting. Thank you.
I think we take only those two questions. Maybe at the end you can still, because we have 2 minutes. Okay,
I
go
think
ahead.
I can pick up on that
Yes.
question. So in fungal architecture, which was the previous before Fungateria, so we actually we wanted to use, it didn't really work out, but still the idea was to use living mycelium to sense environmental changes, so acting as sensors. From our colleagues in Bristol, they figured out that actually mycelium responds in peaks, in different peaks, if it is stressed in different ways. So if it is mechanically stressed, it has a peak, a particular peak, and if it's stressed by temperature, it has another peak. So the whole idea was to have this hybrid architecture that would embed living and dead, and the living part would be used as a sensor. So we would read the peak and actually understand the environmental changes in the architecture. So I mean, I think it can be used as sensors. That's amazing. So if there is a lack of a lack of humidity, it would register in a way so that you can regulate it in a way. Or if structural stresses, right? Like you can actually monitor the stress of the structure through living mycelium. I mean, this is amazing, you know? So I think it's very much possible. Very close to do that, actually. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Who wants to answer about the cordyceps? Want to talk about that? Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't be too worried about that. I think you can look. There are, you know, we mentioned the million of species of fungi organism. There could be a few bad one in there. To the point that we take control of our neurological system, that I don't think is going to happen. It does happen with some with some insects, and that's where the idea from actually the show came from. There are some cordyceps that are able to take control of some insects and make them go to the top of the trees. I mean, it's actually fascinating. We don't really understand how it's happening, which shows the sort of the intelligence of these systems. But as far as taking control of our systems, I would not worry too much. We're not going, this is not the beginning of the zombie apocalypse, I promise you, it's not happening. I just want to add one comment quickly on the sensor. One thing that's fascinating about intelligence, which is the way information circulates in so many ways, is that it is kind of an emerging property of networks. Right? If you think about your brain, you got billions of neurons that are connected, and intelligence emerged from that. When you look at our fungi system, they are really very complex, interconnected system. And as you know, as Dima was mentioning earlier, intelligence, some problem solving emerged from that as a property from this complex system. So, of course, being living organisms, they can detect a lot of things, and they can communicate within themselves the information that they're detecting. So absolutely, it is happening already. In terms of using that for human purposes, I don't think it's used very much today, but there's no reason why it could not be used for certain applications.
Thank you so much to the panel for your wonderful insights, and to the audience for accompanying us today. We have to finish the panel, but please feel free to reach to any of us if you want to discuss further. I have to say there's a testing of yogurt right outside. Yes. So please also get some before you leave. And just to finish, my last words is let fungi grow on you. And with that, we close. Thank you so much.